Hello, good day. So, I have here the Gestalt psychology under the module 9. Next slide. So here we have the take the challenge. In this module, challenge yourself to attain the following learning outcomes. First, we'll have to describe the different Gestalt principles. Next is we have to list the ways of applying Gestalt psychology in the teaching learning process. And then lastly, we'll have to demonstrate appreciation of the usefulness of Gestalt principles in the teaching learning process. And then we also have here our introduction. Let me just read. Gestalt psychology was the forefront of the cognitive psychology. It has served as the foundation of the cognitive perspective to learning. It opposed the external and mechanistic focus of behaviorism. It considered the mental process and products of perception. So let me just add that this Gestalt psychology is under the Unit 3.2 Cognitive Perspective. So moving on, next slide. I have prepared an advanced organizer, so which we will be tackling for this report. So I have the Gestalt psychology. So what are those that are under the Gestalt principles? First, we have the law of proximity. Next, we have the law of closure, the law of good continuation, law of good fragments, and the law of figure and ground. Next, we have also the insight learning. And lastly, we have the life space of Lewin, and under it we have the inner forces and outer forces. So that is the advanced organizer of everything that we will be talking today. Next page. So Gestalt theory was the initial cognitive response to behaviorism. It has emphasized the importance of sensory wholes and the dynamic nature of visual perception. The term Gestalt means form or configuration. Psychologists Max Widmer, Wolfgang, and Kurt Kafka studied perception and concluded that perceivers or learners are not passive, but rather active. They suggested that learners do not just collect information as is, but they actively process and restructure the data in order to understand it. So the learners doesn't just accept what they learned, but they reconstruct it in their mind to understand it more. So this is the perceptual process. Certain factors impact on the perceptual process. So the certain factors that we are talking there is the factors like past experiences, needs, the attitudes, and one's present situation can affect their perception according to Max, Wolfgang, and Kurt. So according to Gestalt psychologists, the way we form our perceptions are guided by certain principles or laws. These principles or laws determine what we see or make of things or situation we meet. Here we have the first example, the Gestalt principles. The law of proximity. So elements that are closer together will be perceived as a coherent object. When objects we are perceiving are near to each other, we perceive them as belonging together. So try to see the picture. One of the original Gestalt principle or the law of proximity, which claims that things closer to each other appear more related than things farther apart. So kung sino yung magkakatabi, sila yung nakikita natin as a group. So, the first one perceived as separate groups since may space sa gitna nila. And the second picture, the second example here, they are close together, the circle are close together, so they are perceived as one group. So, next we have the law of similarity. The principle of similarity states that when things appear to be similar to each other, we group them together. And we also tend to think they have the same function. Elements that look similar will be perceived as part of the same form. So here in the example, There seems to be a diamond in a square. We link similar elements together. So we can see that the group of circles are forming diamond in the middle, and the triangles are forming a square at the corners. I hope you can see it at the picture. Next, we have the law of closure. We tend to fill the gaps or close the figures we perceive. We enclose a space by completing a contour and ignoring gaps in the figure. So in the pictures, let's say for example that circle, kahit na may spasyo na at kahit may guhit na hindi natutuloy, we still see it as a circle. Next, law of good continuation. Individuals have the tendency to continue contours whenever the elements of the pattern establish an implied direction. People tend to draw a good continuous line. So, kagaya ng nauna, kahit na parang lumalabo na siya, still we continue forming an S. The next one, we continue to follow the lines, the up and the down, since the elements of the good continuation establish an implied direction. Next, the law of good fragments. The stimulus will be organized into as good as a figure as possible. In this example, good refers to symmetry, simplicity, and regularity. So the figure is perceived as square overlapping a triangle. So the law of good fragments is talking about making things as simple as possible. So we can see in the picture, like, what is this photo? What is this picture? And then we'll think about just a simple triangle and square. That is what a law of good fragments is talking about. Next, law of figure and ground. The figure ground principle states that people instinctively perceive objects as either being in foreground or background. They either stand out prominently, what is what we call the figure, or recede in the background. So in this example, we can see an apple, what do you call that? Icon. However, we can also see a man. Right there, his face is kinda sideways. So that is the law of figure and ground. So the law of figure and ground is known as identifying a figure from the background. So we're done talking about the Gestalt principles, and now we're moving on to the insight learning. Kohler proposed the view that insight follows from the characteristics of objects under consideration. His theory suggested that learning could occur when the individual perceives the relationships of the elements before him and reorganizes these elements and comes to a greater understanding or insight. So this could occur without reinforcement, and once it occurs, no review or training or investigation is necessary. Significantly, insight is not necessarily observable by another person. Moving on, since I really have a little time more. So Gestalt principles and the teaching learning process. The 6 Gestalt principles only not influence perception, but they also impact on learning. Other psychologists like Kurt Lewin expounded on Gestalt psychology. His theory, focusing on life space, adhered to Gestalt psychology. He said that an individual has inner and outer forces. So it affects his perception and also his learning. Inner forces include his own motivation, attitudes, and feelings. Outer forces may include the attitude and behavior of the teacher and classmates. All these forces interact and impact on the person's learning. Mario Polito, an Italian psychologist, writes about the relevance of Gestalt psychology to education. So again, the inner forces talks about motivation, attitudes, and feelings. The outer forces talks about the attitude and behavior of the teachers and classmates. That is why called the outer. And now I have prepared a short quiz, a 1 to 5 item quiz. These are the questions. May you just read it. Next, I have also here my learnings. That would be all.